We hear a lot about the mental load of motherhood, and rightfully so. But what about dads? What are they struggling with that we're not seeing? Today, Adam Flaherty is back on the show. He's the host of the podcast Modern Dadhood, and after interviewing over 150 dads from all kinds of backgrounds, he's bringing us the real talk on what dads wish moms knew, why they're lonelier than we think, and how parenthood changes their identity too. If you've ever wondered what's really going on in the heads of the dads in your life, this episode might change the way you see them. Welcome to Mom's Guide to Finding Herself, where we share stories of side hustles and surviving while parenting young children. I'm your host, Krissy. Let's make motherhood less lonely and help you find joy in being you again. I am thrilled to have Adam Flaherty back with me today. If you missed the last episode, you'll definitely want to go back and hear his story of how fatherhood reshaped his identity and his life. But today we're taking it even deeper because Adam has interviewed over 150 dads on his podcast, Modern Dadhood, and he's here to share what he's learned. Adam's a proud dad of 2 powerful daughters and a husband to an equally powerful wife, and a creative professional based in Southern Maine. He's a commercial director and video editor by trade, a podcast host by passion, and a voice actor on the side. But today he's here as a fellow parent, trying to figure it out alongside the rest of us. And let me tell you, what he's sharing in this episode opened my eyes. From the loneliness that dads don't always talk about to the invisible pressures that they carry. This conversation is one we all need to hear. Adam, thank you so much for coming back today. I'm so excited to dive into the observations that you have made throughout the years talking to dads on your podcast.
My pleasure. The last chat was really fun. I'm looking forward to this one, Krissy.
We hear a lot about the struggles that moms go through. I mean, maybe it's just me because I'm in this world and that's what my algorithm's showing me, but I think it's bigger than that. I think we miss the conversation of what a dad is really going through. And there's probably a lot of reasons for it, for why we're not hearing about it, why it's not in the forefront. But if you can tell me, what are some of the things that dads are struggling with, or what are the big experiences that dads are facing that we're just not seeing?
Well, in having interviewed over, I think we're at 123 episodes of Modern Dadhood. So in interviewing that many dads, there's a few things that come up frequently. One of them is something that I'm certain that moms are dealing with too, because it's just so prevalent, but just kind of a fear of technology and putting internet-enabled devices into our kids' hands. And it's just something that I feel like none of us are ready for or know exactly how to control it or how to observe it or put limitations on it. And it's just something that pops up a lot in our conversations. But something that, again, not exclusive to dads by any means, but maybe not something that's discussed as much, is this idea of loneliness. And I know from talking to a lot of dads that when they start having kids, they lose their sense of self. And it may be losing a routine, right? A health routine, working out or eating healthy, or even mental wellness. It may be not doing social things with friends anymore, but despite so many people being like in exactly the same place in their life, they're not connecting with people to talk about it. And so there's no outlet to discuss the things that are hard and the things that are awesome. And so loneliness is something that really prevails in a lot of dads. But I think just because of the nature of being a man, allowing yourself to be vulnerable is not something that comes naturally to most of us. And so the idea of talking about feeling lonely, it feels like we're whining or complaining. And so that's something that's another theme that's come up on our show a lot, that I was kind of surprised to hear the first few times, because reflecting on my own experience raising my kids when they were young, it's not something that I felt super connected with.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in our last conversation, and I actually made a note about this and I forgot to bring it up. You mentioned how your wife was in Facebook groups
Yeah.
and was connecting with lots of other moms who were in the same phase as her. And we talk about that a lot on this podcast of sometimes why our old friendships don't necessarily translate over is because we're all just kind of in different parts. Like they might come back, but we have different things going on, different values, different things that are important. But there's not the dad groups,
I don't think so. I'm
right?
it
There's a few,
I'm
but
in one dad group on Facebook that was much more active, 10 years ago when I was raising a newborn. But no, there's not a lot out there. And it's kind of what we're aiming to do with our podcast. We haven't
yeah.
really put a focus on building a community, so to speak, where like people can message back and forth, but at least creating content around topics that are fatherhood adjacent, and so that anybody who's kind of going through any stage of fatherhood can find things that relate to where they're at, and recognize that, hey, there's a lot of other people out there that are experiencing this too. And whether we have a guest who is actually imparting wisdom or sharing tips for how to get through things like you do so well in your podcast, or it's just a comedian who's talking about how ridiculous it is, touring the country, making fart jokes, but at home they're dealing with the same things that we are, that any dad's going through. Just sort of like celebrating the good stuff, commiserating about the tough stuff. I think that there's value in that kind of content, even without like necessarily a Facebook group.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. I mean, and I know that there is a Daddit page on Reddit. So if that's something, a community that is interesting, there's a space there. But there's not like the local dad groups. There's not necessarily, it's just not a thing you do. So the conversations that you're having with your friends that aren't like you talked about, you were so into music and then you weren't in the same way. So the conversations, do they almost become superficial? If you aren't able to talk about the things that are the most important to you in the way that you can relate to somebody else with it, right? Like if you're girls or something that your kid's going through, it's so important to you. Like maybe you just like spent forever building a playset, picking out a playset for the backyard. And you did all this research. Your friends don't care about that necessarily,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so I think where those conversations happen is, at least in the case of my experience and my co-host Mark, we had been friends prior to having kids, but then when we started having kids, our conversations just started being about our kids. And we've talked a lot about how when there's a neighborhood get together or a holiday party and there's other friends that are your age who are going through what you're going through, then you start talking about it. But it's more like one-on-one conversations when those events pop up. I haven't seen a lot of local groups that meet at a regular cadence, and I think like more of that would be awesome. Just camaraderie, support. Like you don't have to talk about your kids, but just knowing that the other people there's this shared experience. I think I think there would be a lot of value in something like that. More of that.
Yeah. Right. The understanding what kind of pressures you're facing and what things. And I hear what you're saying with it probably gets easier when you start to meet people through when your kids are in school
Sure,
and
yeah.
school age. But in those early years, man, yeah, that loneliness, that is so important to point out. So we talk on this show a lot about what moms grieve. We grieve who we used to be. We grieve the values that we used to have. We're faced with a lot of shame of the things that we used to think were important and that are no longer important to us. So there's a lot of shame attached to that. What do you think dads are grieving that they don't necessarily realize that they're facing?
Probably just my instinct is that it's first and foremost just the loss of freedom, like the ability to spontaneously do whatever you want to do. But I also don't know that most dads are thinking about it in that way. So I think it's a natural thing to grieve, but I just don't think that we're putting a label on it and thinking, I'm upset or sad or depressed because now I feel like I'm tethered to my house and my kid, when I used to be able to take off for 3 hours and go do this thing that I love to do.
Now, this is something I want to touch on because when I post about things like this for moms and the mom perspective, I'll get a lot of comments like, why is it only the moms that have to do this? Why can the dads still go out and do hours of golf or whatever the thing is? And obviously, not every relationship, not every person is the same. But with all of the dads that you've talked to, do you see that that's a common thread where dads are able to go still do all these things? Or is it a common thread that you're a lot less, you're a lot more restricted than we think you are?
Well, I think you said it, Krissy, that every relationship dynamic is different, and there's always a give and take. But the common thread that I've found through, I would say, basically all of the conversations that we've had with guests on our show is that we instinctively feel driven to be as equitable partners as we can, and to be present with our family and involved with our kids, and make it our job, our shared job with our partners, to raise empathetic kids and to model the things that we want to see in our kids. So I don't know. That's a tough one for me, because maybe maybe we are inviting guests onto our show who, fit a certain mold. It's interesting to think about, because the whole mission of our show is to invite dads whose experiences are different from our own. Mark and I are two like white guys who wear plaid shirts and glasses and live in like suburban New England, which is so non-diverse. And so we aim to bring on people who represent like a more diverse experience. And that could be like race, ethnicity, that could be their sexuality, that could be their age, it could be socioeconomic status. But I found that it's a common thread that we, even if it's not necessarily what was modeled to us growing up by our own dads and grandfathers, we strive to be present and to be, equal partners. So I don't know. That's a tough one. I'm not saying by any means that it's the in a situation like what you've described, that it's the responsibility of a wife to say, hey, you can't do that. But I think it goes back to one of the things we were chatting about in the last episode, which is there just needs to be open communication about that stuff. And I think both partners need to maybe push out of their comfort zone and be honest and say what's not working for them. And if a husband is out like golfing for 3 hours and his wife doesn't feel like that's equitable or that's fair, or that she doesn't have the opportunities to do things like that, like I think open conversations around that could make a huge difference.
I think it's important what you said, and I want to reiterate it, that you're finding that whether or not it's the case in practice, there seems to be this drive, this desire, this intention of creating an equitable relationship. And I think that's important, because if that is truly what is intended, what is meant and desired, then that changes the conversation.
Yeah.
Right. Versus being defensive or being attacking, instead of saying, you don't want this, knowing that they are in their depth probably do want this, because that's what you're finding that most men seem to want. Then that's a different kind of conversation.
Well, that's what most men seem to want who come on our podcast.
Right. Yes.
So, so again, like I just want to preface it by saying, like, maybe we've created this space that, like, even though we seek to have conversation, like to learn from people whose experiences are different, like maybe we have created a space that is most comfortable and most attractive to people dads who do seek equitable partnerships and do try to be as supportive as they can and all that.
Now, what do you see is something that dads maybe wish they had for support that they don't necessarily have? We talked about the community aspect, but what could they be getting maybe from the moms in their lives who are listening today? What kinds of support do you think they would want from their moms that they're not necessarily getting, they don't even know to ask for?
That's a great question. And I'm not sure about support from their partners, but, jumping back to the loneliness thing and the vulnerability thing, like, I just think we have this situation where men don't feel, in some cases, can't even look at the situation objectively and recognize that they are needing support in certain ways. And the other piece of it, which can be really tricky, is they feel, and I'm sharing this just from things that I've learned from other dads, they feel that voicing that they need support, like, discredits what their wife is experiencing in some ways, whether it is or not. Like, that there's this perception that, like, I can't ask for help for something because look at what my wife's doing. It's 10 times harder than what I'm going through, and she's doing fine. And so again, like, I feel like I'm just keep repeating myself like a broken record, but it just comes down to, like, communication and being willing to talk about it and lay it all on the table and be vulnerable when that is very uncomfortable sometimes for dads. One other thing that I want to mention is we had an episode several months back, and my guest's name was Kelly Jean-Philippe, who has a podcast called The Miscarriage Dad. And he and his wife have gone through several miscarriages, but he was sharing stories about experiencing a miscarriage, going into a clinic after to do the terrible processes that you have to go through, and just being, like, ignored and just, like, invalidated by the providers. And again, like, his intention would never be to take away support or invalidate his wife's experience. Like, she was carrying a baby and it was not viable, and that, like, she has a completely different physical and emotional connection to what was growing inside of her, but he just felt like completely overlooked, and really is doing what he can to shine a light on that now, so that other men who are going through this process with their partners may have, more resources available to them. And that was a real eye-opener for me.
What a podcast. Wow. Yes, that's such an incredible aspect to shed light on. And the way you said it, I mean, you've said the communication thing several times, and I think that's important, but the way you said it just now of why men may not be communicating their needs because they don't want to invalidate the needs of their wife or their partner. Like, you are going through so much. I see you. I see that. So I'm going to push myself to the side. I'm going to sacrifice what I need because I don't want it to overshadow you. So what I'm hearing is that as moms, one thing that we can do to support the men in our lives might be to open that door, to maybe open the conversation, or to even look for the things that your partner might be struggling with. So that way you can open that door to that conversation for them, because they don't want to step on your toes.
I think it's very true, and that's very fair. But I also just want to be careful to not, like, make it the wife's job to have to open that door. It's like, to use an example, it's like asking a person of color to explain what DEI is and why you should care about it and what you can do to be an ally or an advocate for them. It's not that person's job to teach you. Like you have the ability to learn about that on your own, other ways, and become an ally without a task to the person who, to the person who is on the receiving end of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. I think the common theme here, what I'm hearing from both of us, is that we just want to fix things for each other.
I think so.
We just want to give each other a great experience and make each other happy. We're trying to figure out how we can do that. And at the end of the day, you just have to do it for yourself with the support of somebody else, for sure. But you have to ask for that support. You have to know what you want.
I think that's right.
So if you could tell new moms, or, I mean, I guess the people listening aren't really new moms. Most of my listeners have children that are either toddlers, preschoolers, or beyond. If you could tell them one thing that might totally shift how they see their partner, what might you tell them?
I think it is just that as dads, we want to be part of this. We want to do the best we can. There are things that won't come naturally to us, but we want to learn and we want to be an active participant in raising our children together. And so even though it's not your job to teach us, like, please feel free to open those doors and allow us to support and be involved to the best and highest degree that we can.
Your insights, Adam, have been so incredibly educational. I feel like I have learned a lot through talking to you about how I can support my husband and just open up more conversations, open up different kinds of conversations than what we've been having in order to try to support both of us, because the conversation about male mental health needs to be louder, but at least it's getting a little bit louder. And I'm glad that you have been a part of that conversation, because we need more spaces for dads to be able to talk to each other, because you're right, the loneliness is real. And I think that's what's widespread. So tell us, where can everyone find you and your podcast?
Sure. Well, you can find Modern Dadhood at moderndadhood.com, or just search Modern Dadhood on any of the podcast platforms. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Sometimes we appear on TikTok and on YouTube. So really anywhere that you might be looking, you can find Modern Dadhood. For information on me specifically, I have a website, adamflaherty.tv. And I can spell that, but if you're going to include a link in your episode notes, then I won't bother you with spelling my ridiculous last name.
I will definitely include a link in the show notes, so that way you can just scroll on over to that and connect with Adam. Thank you so much for being here with me, Adam.
Thank you, Krissy. This has been so much fun.
If you found this episode as interesting as I did, share it with a friend or some of the dads in your life. Take a second to follow the show and leave a rating and review. It really helps more moms find the show. And come on over and say hi on Instagram at Mom Identity Project. I'd love to connect with you. If you're ready to start making some more connections, sending DMs, or reaching out at the playground, then you can grab my free PDF, Make Mom Friends in 7 Days. It's full of scripts, prompts, and reflection tools that you can use, or copy and paste messages that you can send right now to start making those connections and friendships. You can find the link in the show notes. Today, we talked a lot about how loneliness impacts dads, and we know that they're not alone in that. Moms feel it too. If you've ever felt like you're surrounded by people but still totally alone, like you've somehow disappeared into the role of mom, the next episode is for you. We'll unpack why this happens, how it sneaks up on us, and most importantly, how connection is still possible even when you're in the thick of it.